welcome our panelists, starting with Dr. Danielle Ivey. Dr. Ivey is a skilled clinician and teacher with special interests in internal medicine, adult preventative care, and women's health. She previously served on the faculty of the Texas A&M College of Medicine in Dallas. She is board certified in internal medicine and is currently practicing as a primary care physician in Fort Worth and a clinical attending for a residency program in Fort Worth. Dr. Ivey received her MD from the McGovern Medical School, D from the McGovern Medical School in UC in internal medicine at the Baylor University Medical Center. Next, I'd like to introduce Professor Drew Ivey. Professor Ivey teaches various levels of biology and is in the laboratory director for the College of Natural Science and Mathematics, as well as the principal pre-medical advisor at Dallas Baptist University. He is currently in the final process of receiving his doctorate in philosophy and biological sciences. His first graduate degree is in molecular biology with a concentration in immunology. He was a principal investigator in the Cancer Immunobiology Department at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center for 11 years. Professor Ivey has taught classes focusing on immunology, molecular biology, and human physiology. Now I'd like to introduce Dr. Joon Kim. Successful application to medical schools requires more than just a great GPA and MCAT score. Joon Kim, EDD, has been assisting pre-meds as an academic coach and mentor for the past 19 years. Dr. Kim earned his doctorate in educational leadership with a concentration in educational psychology from USC, where he also completed his master's degree specializing in higher education. He holds a BA in psychology and college admissions counseling certificate from UCLA. He has advised undergraduate students in the biological sciences as well as neuroscience, baccalaureate MD, and post-baccalaureate and graduate academic enhancement programs. For those of you who do not know me, I am Dr. Lesa Weber. I practiced dentistry for many years, both in public health service and in private practice. I taught part-time at the University of Oklahoma College of Dentistry and was a volunteer instructor at the University of Texas College of Dentistry. I transitioned to college counseling and work with high school students around the country that have a wide variety of interests. I work with many pre-health professional students. Also tonight is college counseling founder Evelyn Jerome Alexander, and she is fielding the questions in the Q&A box. So start with a few questions that many students ask me and other Magellan team members. And I'll start with you, Professor Ivey. The most common question that I get is, what is the best major for a pre-med student?
Whatever you're best at. I used to tell people, wherever you spend the most of your time, that's what you generally like doing. And so follow it. The only thing is, generally, with colleges getting more expensive, you have to make sure that you fulfill all requirements for MCAT and for medical schools. So sometimes I can usually add hours onto most of the degrees outside of the biological fields. But you can have any degree to go to medical school, psychology, business, anything you want. It's just how much longer do you want to take to get those prereqs within those college years to fulfill those requirements for the medical school and MCAT. Some majors may take you longer. Right now I have an advisee. She's a music major. That's like 131 hours, and eventually, like, her scholarships are about to run out, but she still needs about 26 more hours to fulfill those. So really, it just depends on time, money, and how direct of a route you want to take. What kind of foundation do you want when you go to medical school?
So I found a quote that I want to repeat because I think that it kind of sums it all up. And it was from an associate dean of admissions at the Cleveland Clinic Lerner College of Medicine. And it is, majors will not limit you, but low GPAs and MCAT scores can. Your experiences with volunteering, shadowing, researching, and writing are more important than your major. And I think basically that's it in a nutshell. And I think what you said was very important about doing what you like. And you have to take all those factors into consideration about everything is expensive and how long do you want to take, and having all of those requirements done, and seeing how it helps you in medical school. Dr. Ivy, what was your major, and do you feel it helped you in medical school?
So my major was biology, and then I minored in chemistry. I think one of the aspects that really did help me was just I had a very good science foundation, particularly in ability to do sort of science research, science papers, using a microscope, those type of things. I had a couple people in my first year histology class in medical school who didn't even know how to use a microscope, because they were an English major. And, they learned, and that's okay. But I think that part benefited me a little bit. It doesn't mean that you can't do another major for before medical school, but those little things help. I don't think that the minor helped me at all, honestly. Minors, if it's something that you really enjoy, like if you really enjoy psychology or different things like that, and you have the time and energy, great, go for it. But no one really considers a minor very helpful. It doesn't boost your application any. So unless you really enjoy it, it's probably not necessary.
So when you were in high school, did you know that you wanted to go into medicine?
So that's a great question. I actually probably didn't know I wanted to go into medicine until I was a junior in college. I knew, or I guess I didn't know I wanted to be a doctor until I was a junior in college, but I knew that I loved science and I loved people. And so I just put my whole heart into learning as much as I can, getting as much experiences in different areas of sort of healthcare and science. And as I sort of grew, if I sort of realized that where I would really enjoy using my passions was as a physician.
Okay. Did you do any hands-on medical or volunteer work in high school because you were
So
in science?
yes, so I did several things. So one of the ones is I volunteered at a senior community, sort of an assisted living facility, just visiting with seniors, and I found that I loved it. I loved working with the elderly and learning their stories, and um, helping give them a little bit of sunshine with through the struggles that they had. I also shadowed some physical therapists. My mom is actually a physical therapist, so I had a nice in there, and then also a couple doctors as well to sort of see what it was really like, because textbook learning is always way different than actual practice in the real world.
Mhm, mhm. Dr. Kim, how do you suggest high school students get involved with hands-on activities to show their interest in medicine and medical field?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Seeing that our audience consists of mostly high school students, I'm assuming, one of the most important things for high school students is to identify your interests, begin to start focusing on your strengths. I know that very often students approach many of these things in a very prescriptive manner. And what I mean by that is if we give them the 10 steps, they will follow those 10 steps. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, gaining acceptance into medical school is not a recipe. We're not talking about a cooking recipe that if you follow the steps, good GPA, good MCAT score, and we could even specify numerically the average or the median scores, GPAs and MCATs. We could do hours of clinical experience. You got to go to Central America to get some international medical experience. We can create the checklist. But even if you follow all of that to the T, you very well not get the acceptance that you were expecting, because that's not how the process works. So students that are in high school right now should really start to develop, for example, self-discipline, knowing how to manage your time, knowing that when you encounter something that's difficult, something that you're struggling with, that's a great opportunity for you to further enhance your self-awareness, And it's just a lot of preparation that goes into it. I think sometimes you get too caught up in where you want to end up. You totally forget there's a tree right in front of you and you're going to run into it. So slow down. Everybody's in a rush. I've been working with pre-meds for, like I said, 19 years. It'll be 20 years this May. And everyone wants to get into med school last year. And it's just, you got to slow down. Everybody has their own timeline. Just like every child crawls and walks and eats solid food at slightly different age, different months. But we have students who are always in a rush. Tell me, what do I got to be doing? So what I would just wrap up by saying is find out what subjects you love and why do you love it? And how can you further pursue that interest? Instead of just doing what is expected, how can you go above and beyond? That is cool.
That's a golden nugget. That was perfect.
So, Professor Ivey, there's talk about weed out classes. We hear about, yes, weed out classes.
Yes.
So how rigorous would you say the prerequisites are in a pre-med path? And this is kind of a loaded question because we had a little bit of a discussion before we opened up at 7 o'clock our time, 5 o'clock on the West Coast. So I'm really kind of talking about, say a high school student has a 3.5, a few B's, maybe they didn't have AP biology or AP chem, and they're coming in, maybe they're what we would call a late bloomer, maybe they're kind of thinking late, I maybe want to go pre-med. Do you think they would be prepared for the prerequisite classes?
Yeah. So you can even piggyback on Dr. Kim's answer. I was one of those guys, I could care less about high school. High school is full of so much junk. It's easy, right? It's easy to lose, but like what's, and I never understood the point. So I was like, why am I doing this? You'd be surprised how many people come out with 3.5s, and once they hit college and they're focused on what they actually love and that's all they're doing, man, those are the best students. Since I've been teaching just for 10 years, I've failed at least 3 or 4 valedictorians in my weed out class, even though we're not supposed to call it a weed out class. It's a weed out class. But most of the people that survive, they're the ones who take time to think. They're the ones who are disciplined. They have what I call and what I try to teach my students, my pre-med advice, they're the soft skills. Are you disciplined, professional, altruistic? Are you mature? Are you communicative? Can you text better than you can speak to somebody? Those are things that develop a person further than any high school class will ever take you. And those are the people who can sit down and say, ooh, I like this stuff and I'm going to do it. And generally they have no problem with what we would call a weed out class. The weed out class in general, that gets rid of the indolent, that gets rid of the people who actually decided, hey, I don't want to study this hard for 4 years, or it gets rid of the people who are just going into it for the money or the clout. But the people who have those soft skills that those things that you don't learn in class, that you have to develop on your own, those are the ones who tend to thrive in college, period, no matter what track they're on. Did that answer your question?
It did. And so we'll let the audience in on our little secret. Before this started, we were talking about how kind of the percentage of students that start pre-med that kind of end up applying to medical school. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so roughly the statistic, I mean, you can hide it. You can always say, you know what, at my school, 100% of the people get into med school. Well, out of everybody who gets in, that's great. Of course, it's 100%. But generally, like I said, I'll go out again, since I'm not a mathematician, I'm going to give you just 100 students. In general, most of the time when 100 students enter into a biology program, no matter where you are, you're going to lose at least 15% because they went there because mom or dad thought they should, or because, hey, I took AP Bio and I aced it, but that was nothing like what actual biology is. So they were just interested skewed someplace else. And then you're going to lose, you're going to probably lose another 30 to maybe about 30% just to people who don't have that ability or that desire or that discipline to keep up with the workload and just don't end up passing well. So generally 50% max is at the end of their first year of college is usually the retainment in most pre-medical programs. Now, again, the size of the school matters. The big schools, my University of Tennessee, they're not going to notice that 50%, but a smaller school is going to notice a 50%, or if somebody who's watching out for you. But yeah, so generally by the time you get to be a senior, about 30% make it with GPAs. Again, the numbers get you by the computers, the soft skills get you into the school. And the interviews. So if you can get by the computers, then generally roughly 20 to 30% max are the ones who are actually going to get in. And those are the most dedicated. And again, like Dr. Kim said, there's no recipe. I can't, if anyone tells you if you follow this, and this, you're going to get in, that's the person not to listen to anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
And Dr. Ivey, would you want to add any more to that? Or I know you're nodding your head, you agree.
Yeah. I think a lot of it nowadays, and I think part of it is for so long, doctors have gotten a bad rap for a bad bedside manner or those type of things, or not even, nowadays the best doctors are not the ones with best test scores. And med schools know that. And so they're getting you through the computers if you have a certain GPA and certain test score, but your interview is so important. So that's one of the big things. And a lot of colleges now will even have all their applicants practice interviewing, which is so important. Making sure you're able to communicate, you have good body language, those type of things are way more important. In addition to, now it's more important to have other interests. So seeing that you're doing some leadership work, seeing that you're doing some volunteer work, those type of things are also very, very important to your resume, not just your grades.
Mm-hmm. And so, Dr. Kim, I know that there's been this whole shift and emphasis on soft skills.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you talk to your students about and how to develop those soft skills, or how can they prepare for because it seems to me that that's something that you kind of either have or you don't.
Oh, we're going to go there. That's great, though. We are going to go there because there is a sort of debate that some of us say, doctors are made and they're not born, and vice versa. We get into that fundamental question of nature versus nurture. I'm in the field of education. I'm in the industry of empowering students and helping them undergo change. Who they begin the education should not be the person who goes on the back end. So I have to believe that it is not completely genetic or fixed. So with that said, there's a strong correlation between the maturity of the student and their match and readiness for medicine. And when I began this work many years ago, spoke to one of the most prominent deans of a really highly rated medical school, and I asked for his advice. If I'm looking to work with students in our program and I need to sort of look for characteristics, what should I be looking for? And his response to me was this: look for just amazing human beings. Science, we can teach them that. They'll learn the science no matter where they go. But to teach someone compassion, to care, those are a lot more difficult to teach. And I said it's difficult to teach as opposed to you can't teach that. Because I again, in my role, I have to believe that those things can be modified to a certain extent. So to help students be more self-aware, like, hey, listen, you just ate the last donut. There's several other people behind you. You could have cut it up into smaller pieces. Just, you can coach people. So I think when it comes to these soft skills, these truly important interpersonal skills, having mentors is incredibly helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Your parents could be mentors, but again, we don't do surgery on our family members. We don't represent our family members in a court of law. It's a little too close. Thankfully, none of my 3 kids are pre-med, at least for right now. But it really is about just, approaching adversity in life as a wonderful opportunity to mature.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really big on that discomfort. In fact, I incorporate into my class these days, if you feel uncomfortable, you're in the right place. It gives you an opportunity to figure out and discover more about who you are. And that is one of my catchphrases these days. I use too often, but I'm going to share it with you, and that is this. Med school admission success is not based on what you do, but it's based on who you want to become. And so as opposed to spilling off your resume, this is what I did, this is what I did, you want those things actually to reflect the person that you are and you strive to become. So it's a slight difference. It's a different way. It's a mindset shift. But again, it is correlated with maturity. Because some of us, like I'm a late bloomer. I think I was 25 when I finally graduated college. Most are 21, 22. And so just understanding those things, it takes a mentor.
Evelyn and I have talked about this many times. When a high school student comes to one of us and says they're pre-med, and I will say, why? Why do you want to become a physician? You know, they don't have a filter. They'll just say it. And if they say, I want to make a lot of money, or I only want to work part-time, or you know right away, versus when they say, I really want to help people, or I saw what my grandmother went through and I want to make a change, or it's that compassion, and you can tell right away. It's interesting. So I want to get back to some questions that I'm asked by both students and parents. And it has to do with the undergraduate institution that the students attend. And they always want to know, how important is that institution if they plan on going to medical school? How important is that name of that school? And so I'll start with Professor Ivey. What would you say? How important is that? Or, we'll just go around the horn.
So, there's the most successful people in the world will tell you college isn't about learning, it's about making connections. And like Dr. Kim was saying, man, but it's the people who, you can learn the skills, but man, college is just about learning how to cope and how to get to the next step. You are a pre-professional major in pre-med, which means I'm a stop sign for you. Like, you're here and you don't want to be here. You're just here because you have to get someplace else. There are students I've seen, I've at UT Southwestern where I was, I've seen people get in from the smallest schools to the largest schools. Sometimes the size of the school can hurt you if you're a certain type of student. Does that make sense? You can get lost in the flood. Sometimes if there's a medical school associated with that school, it can be easier to get in. But if you're not part of that little group, then you're now just a regular statistic. Does that make sense? So I know I always tell people undergrad school, it's like a marriage. Like when you go look at all these schools, man, you'll know when the size, you'll know when it feels right. And dig your heels in and don't ever look back. There's never a bad decision. There's always just how you're going to cope with the consequences of the decisions you make. So man, just find a school that you love, find a school that's, that's going to fit you best, because that's where you're going to thrive, where you feel most comfortable. That's where you're going to go. And what I mean by comfortable is you need to be comfortable because, like Dr. Kim, I believe firmly that you need to be refined. If you're not being refined, you're not changing. And if you're not changing, you're not growing, and you're not going to go anywhere. So find some place where you're going to feel comfortable enough to get your tail whooped and be okay with it. So that's my 2 cents.
I agree. Dr. Ivey, you feel differently, or?
Yeah. So I definitely agree. You need to find the college that fits you, your personality, where you can really connect and sort of grow yourself and those relationships with peers. But I think one of the biggest things, and Dr. Kim sort of mentioned this a little bit, is go to a place where you're going to be able to find mentors who want to invest in you. And it's a little bit easier to find that in smaller schools. Get to know your professors, ask lots of questions. You don't want to be just a number. I did go to a smaller school, and I had like 3 or 4 wonderful mentors as my professors that I still keep in contact with today. And so much advice you can get on your path to medicine that you can't learn in a textbook. People who, there's a lot of physicians who've gone back and are teaching at colleges, and they've gone through it. They know what it looks like, and you can't put a price on that. It's just priceless to have that type of mentorship.
Right. Dr. Kim?
Yes. So I just saw the note that Evelyn put, get to know your professors, which is absolutely true. And but I also think back to when I was a lot of these students' age, I always struggled with how. I know what to do, but I don't know how to do it. And so this is one of those things where, again, a mentor could tell you how to get to know your professors. And there are some schools where it facilitates that really well. So, for example, out here in the Claremont colleges, I found out that students can invite professors to lunch. And when they do that, lunch is free for both of them. So you got a bunch of faculty hanging around the cafeteria trying to get a free lunch, but it, again, facilitates the rapport and relationship building between professors and students. So get to know your professors. It's absolutely important, because at some point, all of you will need letters, and those letters are, it takes time. Just remember, everyone, human relationships take time. You can't just go in for one office hour, bring them an apple, put it on the table and say, by the way, can I get a letter? I'm applying to medical school. Not how it works. Relationships take time. Relationships are messy sometimes and unpredictable. So, all right. So going to the question of undergrad institution, my response would be a little bit more nuanced, just because I've had the good fortune of traveling across the country and sort of seeing the cultural differences between the Midwest, the Southern schools, and Northeastern is definitely different. Where you go for school for undergrad, it kind of matters, but it doesn't. And what I mean by that is there are some medical schools, because of various mission commitments, legislative commitments, you have to have a few seats saved for certain students from that undergrad institution. So it's such a small portion of it that I definitely would lean towards undergrad institution doesn't make a difference, but there are these exceptions where it does, and it has to do with familiarity. What do we know about familiarity? Why do companies, Coca-Cola, other brands, why do they advertise? Because familiarity breeds likability. And so, when you go to a school that people are familiar with, it feels good, right? People, as soon as they hear it, they're happy, or they'll just smile and say, oh, especially out here in the West, if I do this, I'm pretty sure if you're a football fan or a Southern California fan, you know what that is. And I can speak to that firsthand, because where I am today out in Claremont is a small graduate school that most people have not heard of, versus USC is a school that most people have heard of. So it doesn't matter where you go. The way I like to describe it is, I love basketball. The NBA doesn't care where you play collegiate ball. Is there some relationship? Yes. You got the perennial powerhouses, Duke and, Kentucky, but you got some amazing Hall of Fame basketball players who never even went to college. So I wouldn't get so fixated on where you go for your undergrad. And I think if you are a Magellan student, I think you guys know that. It is about where you fit, where are you going to thrive? Would you rather go play for the Dodgers or the Lakers, but you're a bench player who sees very little playing time? Or are you going to go to a small market team, but you're going to be this all-star from that team? So go where you're going to thrive.
I will add to that we talk to our students about the fact that you also don't want to be clawing your way to these research opportunities with professors and kind of fighting with graduate students for research opportunities that you might find with a smaller school or a school that really brags about having research opportunities for undergraduate students. Would you agree with that? Radio silence, Dr. Kim?
Oh, for me, research. So there are some medical schools that are, you got to read the mission of the medical school. And it's a little tip that you can gauge. If a medical school has innovation, research in their actual verbiage of their mission, that's a pretty good telltale sign that is something that if that's the school you want to target, you ought to have research. But you have to understand there's a lot of medical schools these days, especially the newer ones. They got the green light by the legislatures and the government agencies, the green light to start that medical school, not because for research purposes, but out of need for care for the medically underserved communities. So they're not interested in research. So for you to say, oh, I'm published in 15 articles towards a school that's really mission is to serve the medically underserved, and you have zero experience working with that population, you're not going to be successful with your admission to that school. So you really have to be a lot more knowledgeable what you're pursuing as opposed to getting fixated by prestige. I mean, I know that students frequently get really enamored with publications, right? I mean, if you're going the PhD route, yes, you absolutely need publications. But for medical school, it depends.
Okay, all right.
And I would have, oh,
Go ahead, please, Professor.
yeah, I'd go ahead and add, really, I mean, and that's part of that work that a student needs to do is their homework. Of course, don't put all your eggs in one basket. So look at your top 5 choices and see where we're going to want to go. Dermatology, I mean, if that's, I mean, of course, you don't want to look too far ahead and gauge what you do, but there are certain types of professions that you're going to need that research, and go ahead and do it. Now, that's not bad if you do. You can get just as much. Really, it's about like the conversation. If you spend your summer working in South Africa with a clinic, and instead of doing research, well, what is that going to tell you? Well, that means now you can answer on what kind of healthcare you can compare to what we have here in America versus there. Or when you're shadowing doctors, have the conversation. Where do you see medicine going? Like, how do you deal with insurance companies? How do you deal with, those are the conversations that increase that maturity that we were talking about, your ability to speak on an adult level. That's, to me, that's where the research and that's where those shadowing, that's where all that is super important. But yes, definitely know, if you know where you're going, that's going to tell you a yes or no to your question.
And just to piggyback off that is, if you're doing something just for your resume or your application, you need to sort of rethink about what you're doing. Yes, it's important to get all of those things, but when you're shadowing, when you're doing research, when you're doing volunteer opportunities, you are looking at how to learn more about science or learn more about people so that you can be a better physician in the future and take better care of your patients. And so every single step of this process, it's not necessarily just a process and ends to a means, or means to an end, sorry. It essentially is like, how are you going to grow as a person so you can be the best possible physician you can be?
Right. So when you were talking about kind of looking at the mission statement of medical schools and kind of doing your research on the schools that you're applying to, so Dr. Ivey, when a student is researching undergraduate schools that they're interested in, should they be considering what that average MCAT score is and the most common medical schools that those students are applying to and their acceptance rates? Should they be looking at that?
So is it helpful if you know that a college has a good program? Yes, that's helpful. But ultimately, a student is going to make or break whatever situation they're in. I believe that a good student who's going to work hard and really study and goes to a poorer program, they're still going to be able to do well. because it's about the time and energy that you invest. But I do think that, if everything was equal in between two programs, you probably would prefer one that has maybe the better scores, just because that maybe they have the better investment from professors, or better guidance on how to study or what to use and those type of things. But ultimately, I think it depends on the student. But yeah, it can be helpful.
So a lot of schools have a pre-med advisor, but some schools don't. How important do you think it is for an undergraduate school to have a pre-med advisor if you are a pre-med student? And I'll let Dr. Ivey and then Professor Ivey kind of take that, and then Dr. Kim.
I personally think it's very important, because there's a lot of nuances when it comes to getting into med school, and it changes so frequently. And pre-med advisors have meetings with a lot of those med school application teams and so forth. So I do think it's important to at least talk to somebody who knows what's going on, whether they're labeled pre-med advisor or not. Someone needs to know up-to-date information about that.
Dr. Ivey. I'm sorry, Professor Ivey.
No, yeah, I agree. I mean, certainly Dr. Google can tell you a lot of stuff, but there is a lot more to it than it, it's a three-dimensional picture. And I think a pre-med advisor, at least what I do is, it's a whole student. Like I said, there's no equation. I'm looking at your grades. I'm looking at, your academic conduct. I'm looking at, can you talk to me? I have students now that are seniors. They're brilliant, but I'm tired at the end of the conversation, because I really had to work hard to have a conversation. So really having somebody that's going to help you understand what's that culture like for pre-med, or for, the application process. I still have juniors who have no idea that they have to do a residency, and because they're not in my department, they're business or psychology, and they haven't come to talk to us yet. So really understand the timing. When do I take the MCAT? Am I ready to take the MCAT? You don't take the MCAT just to see how hard it is. You take it when you're ready. So there's so many little bitty things that you have to keep in mind. And like I said, we go to conferences 2 or 3 times a year, all over the United States, to talk about this kind of stuff, and really just sort of keep our fingers on the pulse. So it is definitely beneficial. If you don't know somebody, really find somebody that does.
So would you think it's a deal breaker if the undergraduate college did not have a pre-med advisor and you wanted to be a pre-med student?
I would say if Dr. Kim's name is somewhere in the Rolodex, then you can go ahead and go to that school and just call him. He sounds like he's a brilliant. That's a tough question. That's a political question. I'm going to let Dr. Kim answer this one first.
Yeah, let's hand that over to Dr. Kim.
Professor Ivey, thank you so much. Your check is in the mail. Thank you for that. I would say that's a difficult question, because it's very nuanced, as Professor Ivey mentioned. So is it important? Absolutely. But again, I use many analogies with the students I work with. It's like, do you want to live your life alone, or do you want to be in a relationship? Well, not if it's an abusive relationship, right? So you have to drill down a little bit. So this is something that many people don't know. So pre-health advisors, they fall under sort of 2 camps. You have professional staff advisors, and you also have faculty advisors. So smaller institutions like the liberal arts colleges tend to have faculty pre-health advisors. Larger public institutions, again, I'm generalizing, but it's a pretty reliable generalization. Public institutions hire professional pre-health advisors. That's what they do. So one of the things that is become pretty evident is that the professional staff advisor tends to experience more higher turnover, because career-wise, they sort of hit a ceiling pretty quickly. I would say under 5 years, 4 to 5 years, there's nowhere for them to go, and so they'll move to another institution. So there's a pretty high rate of turnover, whereas the tenure-track faculty pre-health advisor in a New England state liberal arts college, you're going to have that person who's been doing it for 50 years. So the pre-health advising is important, but only if it's quality. Because you know what's worse than not knowing something is to think that you know something when it's actually incorrect. So bad data is worse than no data. So I would say it is almost a deal breaker. And I say that because when I worked at USC, I had many students who were visiting campuses asking about that very specific student support service, which was pre-health advising. So, but one last thing I want to mention about that is, again, statistics. A lot of students need to learn how to correctly utilize statistics. If a certain school has, let's say, a 95% statistical success rate, what makes you so sure that you're going to be in that 95 and not the 5% that's not successful? It is not a predictive statistic, but again, it gives us a psychological comfort knowing that if you are considering a program with a high level of success, that somehow you will go with the majority and you will be successful as well. And again, I tried that. New Year's resolution, I went to Planet Fitness, I go to Spectrum, I ask these different gyms, hey, what percentage of your members lose 10 pounds in the first 6 months? Because I want to go with the one that has a higher rate of success. And they look at me strange, like I'm speaking a foreign language. So keep that in mind, everybody.
I'm going to tack on, especially what kind of data are you looking at? I mean, if you're an institution, and I would have to say a lot of my graduates these days want to take a year off. Well, once they graduate, they're no longer included in my statistics if they get in. Does that make sense? So that can skew those numbers. So sometimes, so numbers on an internet site, and it's not peer reviewed. It's like they want you to come. So I'm going to give you this best picture and just really looking at what those numbers say. Yeah, I would agree. Just make sure, just do your homework. Do your homework, talk to somebody. Don't read it on Google. Like, go and call somebody, talk to somebody.
Okay. So I've got another question. It's kind of a two-parter. Some schools have pre-med committees and some schools do not. So first, can you educate the audience what a pre-med committee is? And then second, do you feel it's advantageous to have a letter of recommendation from a pre-med committee versus just to have a letter of recommendation from a professor or an advisor? Who wants to tackle
That's
that?
for anybody. I'll go ahead and so here in Texas, some schools require a committee. And generally, but that's sometimes easier, especially if you're doing like a molecular major at University of Texas. Well, there's only a handful of people that you're going to interact with. And so, like I said, and my guess is the professors don't do it. It'll be those cool little overworked, teaching assistants. But we have what's called a pre-professional committee. And like I said, we are a liberal arts school. And so there's, it's comprised, there's 8 of us on this committee. And we interview all of our students before they can interview. I mean, I want to read your personal statement. I want to see, I want you to talk to me, And so when we write a committee letter, generally it's written by someone who's had that person in their class more often than some others. So the letters are very personal. But beyond that, the strength of a committee letter only goes as far as to if it's required. And so again, I would really look. Dental schools in Texas don't require a committee letter. And in Texas, like I said, there's 6 out of the 8 or 9 medical schools in Texas here that require a committee. The other ones, you can do whatever you want. You can certainly submit a committee, but then you still have to submit individual. So again, that's part of that homework. I think committees don't solve much. Sometimes they can muck things up. But if it's small enough and it's a well enough oiled machine, then it can be very beneficial for the student.
Dr. Kim, do you have a?
Yes, I have some info to share with all of you. So not every school has committee letters. So it kind of, think back to high school, you should take advanced courses, you take APs, take IBs. What if your school only has 3 AP classes? Well, you take those 3 AP classes. So some schools don't have it. The value of committee letters, at least in the eyes of the med school admissions, is that it helps to kind of filter a little bit. So when they see a student with a committee letter, they could take a little bit of comfort knowing that they have passed through some type of quality control check. But again, that's only if the school has a committee, but there isn't an inherent advantage of its committee letter better than an individual letter. Again, we get so caught up in the typological sort of initial categorization. Is a public school better or a private school better? Is a science major better? Or we very much take a very dualistic approach to a lot of these things. And it really is the content of the letter. The letters need to provide details enough that helps to provide differentiation that you are indeed a unique individual. Because I, having been part of several different admission committee members, I have read very generic, this is a wonderful student. They got an A in my class. This person would be fantastic as a physician. That does not help at all. So, but if it has something in there, about how, the student had a death in the family, yet the student drove 2 hours both ways to make it to class. I mean, that's the type of detail and specifics that allow the reviewers to get a sense of the character and the person that's behind that letter. So it really is the quality. And that's why you need to have professors that know you, okay? And make sure it's not who you know, but it's who knows you. Because you can name drop all you want, but if they have no idea who you are, that's not very helpful.
So I wanted to leave some time for questions from the attendees, the audience, and I hope that we have some. Evelyn, do we have any questions?
Well, at the moment we don't, but we haven't let them know that they can ask. So
Okay.
Now is the time, you guys, to jump right in. Let's hear what your questions are. There have to be some questions.
Do you censor your students? Come on, let's let them speak up, rise up, everyone. What questions do
Sometimes
students
you
have?
don't realize you don't know until you don't know, which
That's right.
later. Yeah.
That's
While
right.
we're waiting, Dr. Ivey, if you could speak to a freshman pre-med student, what is the best piece of advice you would give them?
I would say shadow, and make sure that you really want to go into medicine. Because like I said, it looks different in the real world than it does on paper. I used to hate writing, and I write more now than I ever expected to write. But it is one of those things that the more you know what you're getting into, the easier it's going to be when you do hit those hard classes, when you're having to get up at 4 a.m. to go to a surgical rotation or do those things. You're able to stick through it because on the other side, you're going to be doing what you love. And so that's one of the things that I think is super important. And in addition to that, find out really early what your why is. Why do you want to go to medical school? Because again, that will help sustain you as well, of like, okay, I'm doing this because I really want to help people. I really love to sort of problem solve or whatever it is, or do procedures. Make sure you find your why so that you can stick through those hard parts, because it does get hard. You can ask my husband. There was plenty of times in med school where I was like, why am I doing this? This is so hard. Is this worth it? And it was. I can say it was, but you have to have that perseverance and that reason why you want to stick to it.
Can I add something? I mean, the why is absolutely important and it's very helpful. But what I found through my experience, some students really struggle with that. That why is very difficult. So what I've told those students to do is, okay, fine, save that question for later. But you can ask yourself this question: how do you know you want to go into medicine? And that helps some students figure it out. And then they're able to find the why. So just keep that.
Yeah, I always tell my students, don't follow a passion, follow your strengths. Passion always follows strengths. Strengths don't always follow passion. We call those hobbies if strength doesn't continue. But yeah, and life isn't about finding yourself. That's the most horrible statement ever. Life is about creating yourself. And you have 4 years to create somebody that the med school is going to love, and that you are going to understand where you need to be. So create. It's a canvas, and it's your canvas. Create wherever you end up. That's where you need to be.
Professor Ivey, can you say that again? I want to make sure I heard you right. Don't follow your passions.
No, don't follow. Yeah, passions are pretty misleading. Follow your strengths. Where do you spend most of your time? What are you good at? And take those skills and then utilize them wherever you go. Passion will follow, I promise, because you're going to get good at something and all of a sudden, hey, this is fun. And then passion right there. And so now you have you have an endless drive to go where you want to go. So there's the how that eventually catches up.
Right.
So that's, I agree with Dr. Campbell.
We do have a couple questions coming in. So Susie wants to know, are the pay-to-play summer medical programs considered worthy? Dr. Kim wants to take this one.
Well, that's a great question. And this is being recorded. Okay. So
Yes.
what I would say is this. There is a very strong justice component in the world of medical school admissions, right? We're talking about the entire population of citizens and residents that need care. So there's a very strong priority placed on the diversification of healthcare providers. They would like to see individuals who grew up in the very community that need those services. And a lot of that makes perfect sense. I mean, if you grew up by a beach community, the chances of you getting your medical license and then practicing medicine at the bottom of a mountainous, desert is pretty low. But if you take a student who grew up in that mountain or near the mountain, the chances of them going back to serve that community is more likely. So the pay for play, there's some biases out there. Let's just put it that way. There are some biases. There are biases that because there's limited opportunities, there are individuals out there who perceive those individuals who participate and take advantage of the pay for play is sort of competing unfairly. I mean, it exists. That's just a reality. But you have to ask yourself, how's that any different from private schools and public schools? How do you go, we can really go down the rabbit's hole with that and really compare all of these things. But I would say, if it's a great value, it's a great learning experience for you, then so what, you pay for it. And again, it's how you talk about these things. I mean, I don't know of any student who's participated and then in their med school application, put in the description for this $5,000 for 3-week, international medical program. You just don't put that in there. And so you have to do your homework, as Professor Ivey has said numerous times. You have to look into it for yourself, not just read what's on the internet by other students.
Lisa, you advise a good number of pre-med students in high school. Do you tell them to go to to take advantage of those summer programs that are sometimes a little bit on the expensive side?
Well, of course, I want them to do something that's local, the shadowing. I always start with the shadowing, always ask them to talk to their own providers, always try to find something in their community first. And then to see what the intentionality is with these pay to play, if you want to call it that. What are they going to gain from it? What is the end result? What are they going to take away from it? There are some of them are more touristy than actually doing any work or volunteering or learning anything. There was one opportunity that a student was looking at where they actually did some service for 2 hours a day. What did they do the rest of the day? So to me, that wasn't really gaining a lot from that. So I steered them away from that.
Yeah. And you know what college admission offices refer to that as? They call it voluntourism.
Right.
It is not said kindly.
Right.
So I generally what Dr. Kim said and what you just said, a longer term volunteer opportunity that they can carry through, multiple years of high school. In other words, you could spend a lot of money and go away for 2 weeks to, Costa Rica, whatever pretty place, and volunteer a little, or you could find somewhere closer to home to volunteer and then just keep doing that every week for a couple of years. That would be really compelling in your college applications.
Right, right. Professor Ivey, I wanted to come back to something that you talked about. You were talking about sometimes you don't see a student until maybe they're a junior, and then, they're still confused about the process. When do you like to see a student, and when would you suggest they come to a pre-med advisor like yourself?
So I would, day one.
Okay.
A lot of the people that you see late are the ones that are from another major, and right, someone told them, again, it's not like it's a lie. You can be a business major in a medical school, yes, but you still have to have the prereqs. Well, they did, no one followed up with that. He just was going, or she was going through their process, and then now they're like, oof, all of a sudden I need physics and all these other things, and then I see them. And so that's when, yeah, so I would love to see them. I don't care when you take the classes. I just want to have that initial, that relationship defining talk, and say, look, this is it. You can take however long you want, but here are the things that you absolutely need to do in order to be successful on the MCAT. And this is who you need to try to be in order to get, to that next step. So sometimes that's hard when you see them late. And so that's why if you are going to go for a different major, even if your advisor or if you have whoever it is, somebody who's helping you with those courses, I know, like someone at Tennessee, you just get emailed your schedule and you go and you're happy with it. But that's when you go and you make that initiative to find somebody in that area, call the admissions, call somebody, who's your pre-medical expert, who's the person that's going to advise somebody, and really start talking with them from your first semester at college. Don't wait until you're done with all your prereqs and then talk to somebody. Yeah, talk early.
One of our students asked in the Q&A, and Dr. Kim is typing an answer, but Drew, while you're unmuted, the question was, in what ways can we gain exposure to better prepare ourselves for taking the medicine path?
I did respond to that. It was really rather short, but it's just, medicine is a field that uses science, but it's not a field about science. It's about people. So it's very important that you become proficient at just engaging with people. And just having, we keep coming back to the word maturity, and that's something that it takes time. There can be catalysts to hopefully speed up a little bit of that, but talking about the volunteerism, the international experiences, there are some students who will take a picture with the native from a developing country, and they think in their minds that's cool. Like, look what I'm doing. And they would upload that to their social media, and that's not how everyone's going to see that. So just, life experiences, making mistakes, it's all part of the process. So try to make a lot of mistakes now when those mistakes aren't too costly. And what else I would recommend is talk to people. Just go to the grocery store, talk to some people. And when students come to me and say, I want to go into medicine, but I'm really shy, I don't want to talk to people. It's kind of like, well, you could be a mortician or pathologist, but still you're going to have to go through medical school. So.
Yeah, I usually tell people, similar. Yeah, it is. It's about the people. If you tell me you want to help people, well, man, my garbage guy, he helps me a lot when he picks up because I don't have to go do that. So how are you going to help people? And so you got to know who you're going to help. And if you're shy, man, it's just like, and if you have a hard time making decisions, the best way to learn how to do both is start small. Make a small decision. You all decide what clothes you're going to wear today. That's a small decision, and you're comfortable with what you did. Well, now move up. Ooh, now I'm going to decide what I'm going to wear today and tomorrow, right? So, and then same thing with have a small conversation with somebody. Start with a larger one. Then maybe get philosophical, right? Maybe ask a deeper question. What's your favorite song to sing in the shower? That's kind of a silly question, right? Which means someone's going to think, but that tells you a lot about someone. Oh, well, man, this guy loves rock and roll, but he definitely dresses like he's a symphony guy, right? So really just learn how to get to know people and appreciate people. Just learning, yeah, you got to appreciate people or medicine will eat you alive.
Well, I want to thank all of you for being here and thank the 3 panelists that helped us. I think it was very valuable. We learned a lot tonight, and I just want to thank everyone.
Thank you guys for your fabulous wisdom. Dr. Joon Kim, Dr. Danielle Ivey, Professor Drew Ivey, thank you so much for being with us. And Dr. Lesa Weber, thank you for moderating.